Chapter 1. The Works of Thomas Sydenham, Volume 1, Section 1, on acute diseases in general. As far as I am capable of a judgment, the dictates of reason are as follows, namely, that a disease, however much its cause may be adverse to the human body, is nothing more than an effort of nature, who strives with might and main to restore the health of the patient by the elimination of the morbific matter. For since it is the will of God, the supreme arbiter and regulator of all things, that the human frame be, by nature, adapted to the reception of impressions from without, it follows that it must also be able to a variety of maladies. These arise partly from the particles of the atmosphere, partly from the different fermentations and putrefactions of the humors. The first insinuate themselves amongst the juices of the body, disagree with them, mix themselves up with the blood, and, finally, taint the whole frame with the contagion of disease. The second are confined within the body longer than they ought to be, its powers having proved incompetent, first to their digestion, afterwards to their excretion. This may arise from either their bulk or the incongruity of their qualities. Such are the conditions complicating and interwoven with the very essence of humanity, and that so closely that no one can succeed in wholly making himself independent of them. Hence nature, in the concatenation of symptoms, has provided a method for the elimination and exclusion of the peccant and foreign matter, which otherwise would undo the whole fabric of our frame, and infinitely than we find to be the case would she gain her end, and attain the restoration that she aims at. In these ungrateful remedies, if she were not diverted by ignorant men from the straight way, that of herself she holdeth. When left indeed to herself, she may do too much or too little, and in either case kill the patient. This, however, is only her obedience to the iron and indissoluble laws of mortality. Or, as Boethius writes, in full consonance with the truth and nature, constat aeterna positumque leg est, constat genitum nihil. 3. Now, just for the sake of proving the truth of the above-mad statement by one or two examples, let us ask what one's the nature of plague. Is it aught else than a complication of symptoms which nature puts in play in order that, through the natural eliminations, either in the way of abscesses or by the help of some other form of eruption, she may expel from the body those infectious particles that we have taken in along with the air that we breathe? And what is gout? It is a provision of nature to purify the blood of old men and to purge the deep parts of the body. Such at least is the language of Hippocrates. The same may be said of all other diseases fully formed. Or, this undertaking nature performs at different rates, quickly or slowly, according to the different processes by which she strives to expel the morbid influence. As often as she calls in the aid of fevers for the isolation of the tainted particles from the remainder of the blood, and when by a further process, either by diaphoresis or diarrhea, by eruptions, or some other evacuation, she expels the particles thus isolate, and when whatsoever is done at all is done amidst the subtile and spirituous constituents of the volume of the blood, and that with a corresponding disturbance, when this, I say, takes place, it becomes a matter of absolute necessity, not only that the recovery or death of the patient be horat epistol, ad Pison 63, Davaji, de Consulat Philosophe, CGD, determined with rapidity, but that grave and terrible symptoms be associated with such an effort of nature. For she is trying her strength, and must either expel the mischief by a crisis, or herself faint in the struggle. This is the sort to which the diseases which we call acute belong, since it is with rapidity, with commotion, and with danger, that they advance to their proper status. To speak, however, with less precision, but with equal truth, those diseases also are to be considered acute, which, although in regard to the whole of their paroxysms taken collectively, they may be said to move slowly, yet in respect to any particular paroxysm have a rapid progress, and terminate quickly in a crisis. Such are all intermittent fevers. 5. Occasionally, however, the parts that contain the disease are by their nature incompetent to determine a fever towards them, and so unable to effect a full separation of the morbific matter. Occasionally also, it fastens upon a part wholly unable to get rid of it at all, and this may arise either from the particular conformation of the part itself, as is the case with the morbid matter impacted the nerves of paralytics, and with the pus in the cavities of a thoracic empyema, or else from a deficiency of the natural heat in animal spirits, as is the case with the phlegm falling upon the lungs of old men worn with coughs. Lastly, on that may be referred to a continuous afflux of new matter. By this, the blood becomes vitiated, and from its excessive disposition to eliminate the same distresses and overwhelms the parts. Now, in all these cases, the morbific matter either never attains its proper coction at all, or else attains it slowly, and the diseases which originate therein are properly called chronic diseases. Classified, therefore, according to the two opposing principles mentioned above, diseases fall into the two classes of acute and chronic. 6. Of acute diseases, and it is these only that I mean at present to deal with some, are engendered through occult and inexplicable changes of the atmosphere. These taint the human frame, but they depend upon the peculiar graces of our blood and humors, only so far as these occult atmospheric influences have made an impression on them. Such maladies continue their devastation during the continuance of the mysterious ski influences in question, but not longer. Neither do they appear in other periods. These diseases are called epidemics. 7. Of acute diseases, others originate from the particular anomalies of particular bodies. There is no general cause for their existence, and they attack but few at a time. Again, with the exception of some which will be treated under their appropriate classes, they occur during any year and at any period of the year indifferently. These I call in-pound, recurrent, or sporadic, inasmuch as they may occur at any time whatsoever during the presence of an epidemic. It is with the epidemics that I mean to begin, and I shall start with exhibiting their general history. Chapter 2. The Works of Thomas Sydenham, Volume 1, Section 1, on Epidemic Diseases. 1. Norheim, in my opinion, strikes the mind that contemplates the whole and open domain of medicine with greater wonder than the well-known varied and inconsistent character of those diseases which we call epidemic. It is not so much that they reflect and depend upon different conditions of climate in one and the same year, as that they represent different and dissimilar constitutions of different and dissimilar years. 2. The evident diversity of diseases is palpably shown, both by the difference and the peculiarities of their symptoms, and the variety of treatment that they require, from all which it is perfectly clear that although the disorders in question may, to a certain degree, both in their external characters and in several symptoms common to many of them, appear to the careless observer to coincide, they are in reality, if we attend closely, of wholly different character, as little like one another as coin and counters. I am not prepared to say that a very careful examination, such a one, however, as the brief life of a single mortal would be insufficient for, would not give us the fact of certain epidemics succeeding each other regularly and in series, forming, as it were, a circle. On the other hand, they may attack us indiscriminately, irrespective of any regular order, dependent only upon the inscrutable constitutions of the atmosphere and the mysterious successions of time. This, at least, on the strength of a multiplicity of accurate observations, I am convinced of, viz. That diseases of the character alluded to, and more especially continued fevers, differ from one another like north and south, and that the remedy which would cure a patient at the beginning of a year will kill him perhaps at the close. That when once by good fortune I have hit upon the true and proper line of practice, that this or that fever requires, I can, with the assistance of the Almighty, by taking my aim in the same direction, generally succeed in my results. Respect being always had to the age and temperament of the patient, and to the other matters of the same sort. This lasts until the first form of epidemic becomes extinct, and until a fresh one sets in. Then I am again in a quandary, and am puzzled to think how I can give relief. And now, unless I use exceeding caution, and unless I exert the full energies of my mind, it is as much as, nay, it is more than I can do to avoid risking the lives of one or two of the first who apply to me as patients. At length, however, I steadily investigate the disease, I comprehend its character, and I proceed straight ahead and in full confidence towards its annihilation. 4. now much and diligently, and to the best of my powers, as I have observed the different characters, in respect to the more manifest atmospheric changes of different years, and thong, with the view of detecting therein the reasons for this discrepancy amongst the epidemic diseases. I am free to confess that I cannot find out that I have proceeded one single inch in my way. The years that undoubtedly coincide in their appreciable atmospheric characters differ in the diseases by which they are infested and vice versa. Now, this is how it is. There are different constitutions in different years. They originate neither in their heat nor their cold, their wet nor their drought, but they depend upon certain hidden and inexplicable changes within the bowels of the earth. By the effluvia from these, the atmosphere becomes contaminated, and the bodies of men are predisposed and determined, as the case may be, to this or that complaint. This continues during the influence of this or that constitution, which, after the cycle of a few years, gives ground and makes way for another. Each and all of these general constitutions take the melancholy characteristic of some proper and peculiar form of fever, a form that appears at no other period. Fevers of this sort we call stationary fevers. Sixth, I may also add that there exist different and peculiar temperaments or crases of the same year. Wherein the fevers that occur are determined by the manifest qualities of the air, follow the general constitution of the year, come on sooner or later, and take more or less the character of epidemics. Besides this, however, the fevers which I have called intercurrent, and which occur in any or all years promiscuously, originate most especially in this or that manifest atmospheric temperament. Thus, to speak for the sake of illustration, pleurisy, quinsy, and other like ailments generally prevail when long and severe cold is rapidly succeeded by sudden heat. Hence, it becomes possible that the sensible and appreciable qualities of the atmosphere may produce such fevers as appear under all constitutions indifferently, but not those which are proper and peculiar to certain particular ones. Nevertheless, we must admit that even the sensible qualities of the atmosphere have a predisposing effect upon our bodies, even in the development of epidemics. The same may be said concerning any error as to the 6 non-naturals. 7. We must observe, however, that some epidemics in this or that year are regular and uniform, with the same phenomena and accompanied with a general conformity of symptoms, in the cases of those whom they attack, and that they take their leave and go off much in the same manner. In these, as being the most perfect of their genus, the true and authentic history of epidemic diseases is to be studied and illustrated. 8. There are also other diseases of other years, which we may call, if we choose, epidemics. They are, however, irregular and anomalous to a great degree. Referable to no certain type, one, the non-naturals are 6 in number, viz. Air, meat, and drink. Motion and rest, sleep and wakefulness, mental emotions, and lastly, the secreta and retenta. They are called non-natural because any excess in respect to them occasions disorder. Greenhill from Blanchard's Lex. Me die and truly ill-conditioned, both on account of the uncertain variety of their symptoms and their certain inconsistency, as well as from the processes by which they clear themselves off and work themselves out. This excessive inconsistency arises from the fact of each constitution, engendering diseases that depart from the character of those of the same sort that have occurred at another time, a fact that holds good with fever and holds good with the generality of epidemics. 9. Nor is this the whole of the story. I had nicer doctrine to exhibit a specimen, as it were, of nature playing tricks. One and the same disease shall, in a year of one and the same constitution, exhibit itself with various and dissimilar aspects as to its origin, its formation, its decline. And of such importance shall these differences be, that our indications of treatment must be adopted or laid aside according to the disposition of the disease. 10. Furthermore, we must remark that all epidemics are referable to one of two classes. They are either vernal or autumnal. Even when they originate during some other period of the year, they must be referred to one of these divisions, spring or autumn, whichever they are nearest to, just as the case may be. For it happens occasionally that the atmospheric influences may so coincide with an epidemic as to forward its development, and to precipitate it, as it were, prematurely upon its victims. On the other hand, there is at times so little correspondence that its proper time passes by before it lays hold of the patients that are predisposed for it. Hence, in using the words spring and autumn, I am not speaking absolutely and by the card, so that I do not mean the precise times of their respective equinoxes. 11. Of the epidemics that show themselves in the spring, there are some that set in quite early. They begin as soon as January. They increase gradually. They reach their height about the 24th of March. They then gradually decline, so that, with the exception of a few that may attack isolated individuals, they disappear by midsummer. To this last belong the measles. So do the spring tertians. These last, although they may set in as late, perhaps as February, nevertheless decline and disappear just as midsummer approaches. Others begin in the spring, increase daily, and reach their climax about the autumnal equinox. When this is over, they gradually decline, and as the cold weather sets in, they turn their back upon the winter. Of this sort are the smallpox and plague, in those years at least where either has the ascendancy over other diseases. 12. Cholera morbus belongs to the autumnal group. LT begins in August, and within the limited barriers of one single month runs its course. Other epidemics, however, although they take their birth in the same season, run into the winter. For instance, dysentery, quartan agues, and autumnal tertians. Each of these, however, much it may make a prolonged attack against those upon whom it fastens, will still, for the most part, within a couple of months, have lost both the name and features of an epidemic. 13. Now, in regard to the special class of fevers, it must be observed that the majority of those which are continued have, up to the present time, had no name founded upon the character of the general constitution. Such names as they are known by are taken from marked changes impressed upon the blood, or else from some other palpable symptom. On this principle they are called putrid, petechial, malignant, and considering, however, that almost every constitution, over and above the fevers that it engenders, has also a tendency to propagate, along with it, some second disease from the class of proper, and the typical epidemics, such as plague, smallpox, dysentery, and I see. For my own part, no reason why fevers of the kind in question should not take their names from the character of the constitution prevalent at the time of their appearance, that being determined by the particular disease which they usher in, rather than from any alteration of the blood or from any particular symptom, points which may hold good in the cases of fever of very different characters. 14 intermittents take their name from the interval that lies between the paroxysms. This character is sufficient to distinguish them, providing always that we bear also in mind the seasons of the year when they occur, viz., the spring and fall. No objection less to this nomenclature, from the circumstance of some of them occasionally partaking of the true intermittent character, without the accompaniment of any palpable symptom. Yet this is the case when the autumnal intermittents set in, and wax rife prematurely, for instance, in the month of July, when they do not at once put on the intermittent type, which one's particularly the case with the spring ones, and when they so closely simulate the character of continued fever that, without the nicest examination and comparison, you cannot discriminate between the one and the other. By degrees, however, as the ascendancy of the particular constitution declines, and as its influence becomes restrained, they change towards the usual type, so that by the end of autumn they lay aside, so to say, their mask and appear openly as what they really were from the first, viz., intermittent, tertian, or quartan, as the case may be. These are points which, if we as physicians overlook, we shall blunder, to the great prejudice of our patients, in treating as true continued fevers like those in question, which are not continued but intermittent. 15. Moreover, and to this we must carefully attend when several of these fevers infest the same year, one has an ascendancy over the others, they being, as it were, reduced to its supremacy, and raging all the more moderately. When the paramount complaint increases, these decrease. When it loses ground, they make way. Thus they vex humanity in complement, as the character of the year and the sensible temperament of the atmosphere favor either the one or the other. That disease, however, which at the autumnal equinox rages worst and devastates most fearfully, determines the name for the constitution of the whole year, and whatsoever the ailment may be, which at that period takes the lead of the rest. It is the one which will easily be found to have done so for the whole year, to have swayed, as it were, the others, and to have accommodated to its own character, as much as their respective natures would allow, the whole of its contemporary epidemics. To illustrate this, we may state that when smallpox is most prevalent, such fevers as occur sporadically during the whole year partake of the variolous inflammation. Hock disease originates same manner. Between the most characteristic symptoms of each, there is a close affinity, excepting only the eruption of smallpox and the accessories that depend upon it. There is abundant proof of this in the excessive tendency to spontaneous diaphoresis and to salivation common to the two diseases. Similarly, when dysenteries are prevalent, the fever that sets in during the year closely resembles them. The attacks of the two diseases are similar. In either case, the patients are exceedingly liable to aphy and similar symptoms, such as the dysentery, however, eliminates its morbid matter by means of stools, and from this there arise a few peculiar symptoms. Nay, the dysentery which we are speaking of is neither more nor less than a fever, with this difference only, viz., that it determines itself towards the viscera, unloads itself by the intestines, and through them makes its escape outwards. It must, however, be remarked that such leading epidemics, as at the autumnal equinox, devastate all things like torrents, which have broken their banks at the approach of the colds of winter retire within their channels. The secondary maladies that serve like soldiers under them take that very time for their development, and then they wax strong, and they take their lead until the paramount epidemic of the next year weakens their vigor and abolishes their name. 18 finale, I must remark that where any particular constitution engenders any species of epidemic, that this species is generically different from the species of any other constitution, however much one name may be current for all, whilst all the peculiar species which set in under one and the same constitution agree with each other in being referable to one common and general producing cause, this being the peculiar atmospheric diathesis. Consequently, however much they may differ from each other in their form and specific type, the common constitution forms and modifies their respective subject matter into a common status and condition. Hence, the chief symptoms, so far as they have nothing to do with the particular form of the evacuation, are alike in all. They all too agree in this. They increase and remit in their severity at similar periods. Furthermore, in those years wherein different species set in at the same time, they all agree, both in the manner of their first attack and the symptoms of their accession. 19. It is from these things that we may learn the nice and varied method which nature recognizes in the development of diseases, a point which I think no man has hitherto studied with the accuracy that its importance demands. Still, from the little that has been done, seeing that the specific differences between our common diseases, viz., fevers are based upon some unknown constitution of the atmosphere enough, is shown to prove that those labor in vain who refer the origin of fevers to some morbid cause accumulated in the human frame. It is clear as the sun at noon that a man might be as strong as a wrestler, but that if he went to certain parts of the country where fever was raging, he would sicken within a day or two. Yet it is hardly credible that any appreciable change could be impressed by the air upon the humor of the man in question in a time so short. 20. It is just as difficult, too, to lay down any general rules for treating these fevers. Rules hence. In darkness so dense I prefer nothing upon the breaking out of a new fever to a little delay, and I proceed especially towards the greater remedies with a slow foot and with circumspection. In the meantime, I diligently observe the course and character of the disease, and look out for those kinds of treatment that do good or harm. The latter I make haste to abandon, the former to adopt. 21. I may state at once that to reduce into classes all the species of epidemics, to arrange them according to their phenomena, to work out their several idiopathic characteristics, to determine in detail the proper method of treatment for each of them, Is a work so difficult, an arrangement requiring so much leisure and opportunity, a cycle so little coincident with any recognized sequence of years, that the lifetime of no single physician would suffice for the collection of a sufficiency of data? Great, however, as such an undertaking may be, it must be got through before we can venture to state that in so complex a series of diseases we have done any good work worthy of mention. 22. How, however, are we to describe those distinct species of epidemic disease that not only, as far at least as we can judge, occur accidentally, but which also shall, at one time, keep the same for a year or for a series of years, and at another assume specific differences within a single 12-month? To my mind, there is no better plan than the following, viz., to take the range of a sufficient number of years and to describe the diseases in the order of their sequence and succession. To do this upon my own principles, I shall now lay before the learned world the history and the treatment of the epidemics of 15 years, or of those which raged between the years 1661 and 1676. These I have founded upon the most accurate observations that I have had an opportunity of making. But it is more than I could do if I referred their origin to causes dependent upon any perceptible quality of the atmosphere, and still more so, if I derived them from any particular disgracy of the blood, and humorous except indeed, so far as this last might originate in any occult atmospheric influences. Still more impossible, if I may use so strong an expression, would it be for me to describe specific forms of epidemics as arising out of specific changes of the atmosphere, easy as such a proceeding may appear to those who can theorize about fevers, and christen the disease, accordingly speculating laxly upon those alterations which can take place in our blood and humors through the degeneration of this or that principle. Upon principles like these, where we lose sight of our best guide, nature, and give ourselves up to the luxury of guesswork, we may have as many species of ailments as we choose to devise. We must claim, however, in doing so, a license which no one would allow to a botanist, from whom in his descriptions and histories we require the evidence and confirmation of our senses. The speculations of reason, in and of themselves, of paramount greatness and transcendency, is what we do not require. 23. I am far from taking upon myself the credit of exhausting my subject in the present observations. It is highly probable that I may fail even in the full enumeration of the epidemics. Still less do I warrant that the diseases which, during the years in question, have succeeded each other in the sequence about to be exhibited, shall remain the same in all future years. One thing, most especially, do I aim. It is my wish to state how things have gone lately, how they have been in this country, and how they have been in this the city epidemic constitution. 4e, which we live in, the observations of some years form my groundwork. It is thus that I would add my mite, such as it is, towards the foundation of a work that, in my humble judgment, shall be beneficial to the human race. Posterity will complete it, since to them it shall be given to take the full double the whole cycle of epidemics and their mutual sequences for years yet to come. Chapter 3. The Works of Thomas Sydenham, Volume 1, Section 1. The Epidemic Constitution of the years 1661, 1662. 1664 in London. In the year 1661, the autumnal intermittents, which during the last few years had been gaining ground, broke out afresh. About the beginning of July, they gathered strength daily. By the month of August, they were doing fearful mischiefs. In many places, the mortality was excessive, and whole families fell victims. The form was an ill-conditioned tertian. Soon after, they gradually decreased. Few were attacked during October. The colds of winter wholly dispelled them. The symptoms that accompanied the present tertian differed from those of the tertian intermittents of other years, chiefly in the following particulars. The paroxysm was severer, the tongue of the patient blacker and drier, the apoplectic intervals were less defined, the prostration of strength was greater, the appetite was more affected, the fits had a greater tendency to repeat themselves. In one word, the symptoms were more formidable, and the disease in general was deadly beyond the degree of an intermittent. If it attacked old men or cachectic subjects or patients who had been weakened by bleeding or other evacuations, it was not got rid of within 2 or 3 months. A few instances of the quartan intermittent accompanied the fever which we have described. Neither form, however, stood their ground against the approach of winter, and no one during that season who had not previously been a sufferer was attacked by them. There then followed a continued fever, which differed in its character from these autumnal intermittents only in being permanent rather than periodic. Each disease made its attack in the same way. Patients suffered alike under each, retching with parched skins, thirsting mouths, and blackened tongues. In either case, also, towards the close of the disease, it was by sweatings that the morbified matter was most readily expelled. 9. It is clear from the forthcoming fact that this fever belongs to the class of the autumnal intermittents. It very rarely showed itself in the beginning of the year. Now, in my eyes, this continued fever was a sort of miniature of the intermittent, whilst each particular paroxysm of the intermittent was a miniature of the continued fever. And the main difference lay only in the following circumstance. The continued fever set up an effervescence and kept it uninterruptedly, and at the same rate, the intermittents did the same, but they got through their work at intervals and by installments. 4. How long a continued fever of this character had prevailed in the year 1661, I am unable to state. Up to that time, I had found enough to do in observing the general symptoms of fever. I had not become aware that they were distinguished from one another according to the different crises of different years, or according to the seasons of one and the same year. This, however, I do know, namely that up to 1665 AD, the character of the continued fever was one and the same, and that the autumnal intermittents which, up to that year, had been frequent, from that time forwards, were of exceeding rarity. 5. To return, however, to the subject, the tertian fever, which, during the last named year, had spread its ravages far and wide as soon as it was over, confined itself within narrower bounds. Whilst for the autumn that came after, under a similar atmospheric constitution, it was quartans that took the lead amongst the epidemics. When autumn is over, the quartans invariably diminish, and continued fever, which, during the sway of the quartans, sparingly mixes itself up with them, rages violently until spring, at which season the vernal intermittents succeed. By the 1st of May, these latter have abated, and smallpox shows itself here and there. These continue till the autumnal epidemics, quartan or continued, show their faces. Upon these they turn tail and leave them a clear field. In this order did the epidemic diseases pervade the constitution that I have spoken of, and thus did they succeed each other. Upon each of these I mean to write in detail, and most particularly upon the continued fever and the intermittents, vernal or autumnal, as the case may be, by which so bad a stamp was given to the constitution of these years. 6. I shall take as a starting point continued fever. I look upon this as the leader of the band. In this, more than in any of the others, does nature, with the greatest uniformity, and most in accordance with a set law, both bring the febrile matter towards its due concoction, and expel and eliminate it, so concocted, within a fixed and definite period. I must add that, inasmuch as those annual constitutions which develop the autumnal intermittents recur, upon an average of years much oftener than those which promote any other form of epidemic, it follows of necessity that the continued fever which goes along with them must also be more frequent. 7. Besides the symptoms that accompany other fevers, the present one was aggravated by the following. The patient was all but dead. He retched. His tongue was parched and black. There was violent and sudden prostration of strength. The surface was dry. The urine was sometimes thick, sometimes thin, either character being equally an indication of crudity. As the disease declined, diarrhea, unless checked at the beginning by the physician, set in. This added obstinacy to the disease and protracted its evils. Still, if left to itself and on its own bottom, it was rarely prolonged beyond either the 14th or the 21st day, after which, through the medium of a sweat, or rather that of a gentle perspiration, it was resolved. Within this period, the urine showed no signs of concoction. When it was over, it generally did so forthwith. 8. Other symptoms were superadded when the disease W is unskillfully treated. These, however, as well as the whole character of the complaint, will best be illustrated by an exhibition of the particular principles that I applied some time back to this fever. The points that particularly bear upon the present question I shall transfer to the present publication from one that was printed some time ago, at which time I had no notion that any second form of fever was to be found in Rerum Natura. Chapter 4. The Works of Thomas Sydenham, Volume 1, Section 1. The continued fever of the years 1661, 1662, 1664. That the inordinate commotion of the volume of the blood, whether cause or concomitant of this fever, is excited by nature in order that either some heterogeneous matter, incorporated with our humors and inimical to them, may be eliminated, or else that the blood itself may be transmuted towards a better diathesis. 2. With this view, I prefer the broad and general term commotion to either fermentation or ebullition. I so cut off the occasion of a mere dispute about words, against which the use of the other two terms, although admitting a fair explanation, would not sufficiently ensure me. To some they might appear harsh, to others inappropriate. However much a febrile commotion of the blood may resemble either the fermentation or the ebullition of vegetable juices, there are many who consider that it differs widely, and in many respects from either the one or the other. In respect to the term fermentation, we will mention one or two of their instances, although fluids, when they begin to ferment, acquire a vinous character, so that ardent spirit may be elicited from them by distillation. And although they easily degenerate into vinegar, which in itself is remarkably acid and yields to distillation an acid spirit, neither of these changes have hitherto been observed in the blood. Although in vinous liquors the fermentation and the depuration go hand in hand and keep pace with each other, the depuration of the blood in fever does by no means go along with its sessuation, but, on the contrary, follows it. Of this we may have ocular demonstration in the clear cases of febrile paroxysms carried off by sweatings. 3. In respect to the term ebullition, they object still more to the analogy. They argue that experience makes against it, and that in many cases the erethism of humors is far from being so uncontrolled as to deserve the name of ebullition. I have no desire to mix myself up with such controversies as these. Be the matter as it may, I shall now and then use the words gesirmentation and ebullition, inasmuch as they have been currently adopted by medical men of late years, provided only that from what has been said upon the subject, it was now clear to the reader that the terms are used in the present treatise solely for the sake of illustration, that this febrile commotion of the blood is excited by nature in order to separate from the humors some heterogeneous matter antagonistic to herself, one's a view supported by the evidence of the whole family of eruptive fevers. In these, the benefit derived from the ebullition of the blood is the elimination by means of the skin of some excrementitious matter lurking in the blood, and endued with deleterious qualities. 4. In my mind also it is equally clear that the febrile commotion of the blood has often, I may say very often, no other aim and end than that of changing itself into some other state and diathesis, and that a man of even pure and untainted blood may be stricken with fever. This has, by frequent observation, been shown to be the case with many healthy constitutions wherein we search in vain for the means and the appliances of disease, wherein there is nothing plethoric, nothing cachectic. Finally, where no unhealthy atmospheric anomalies have paved the way to fever, nevertheless, men thus healthy have, at sundry times in divers places, after some important alteration in the way of air, food, or any of the other so-called non-naturals, been seized by fever, and the reason thereof is this: their blood has been making efforts to endue itself with a new state and condition adapted to the new state and condition of its food or air. The irritation of vicious particles nestling in the blood and evolving fever has nothing to do in the matter. Now, I by no means deny that after the commotion of a fever and the despumation of the blood, the matter that is thus naturally excreted may be vicious, whilst the blood itself shall have been well disposed, and of a laudable diathesis. But I am no more surprised at such being the case than I am at some part of our food coming out stinking and corrupt, After one C note, P34, it has undergone notable changes within our body and taken the character of excretions, 5-5. In the second place, I consider that the true and proper indications that present themselves in this disease must deal with the same commotion of the blood. We must keep it within its limits, so that it coincide with the intentions of nature. If, on the one hand, it rage too much, perilous symptoms will set in. If, on the other, it slacken into insufficiency, either the expulsion of the morbific matter will be hindered, or the efforts of the blood to reduce itself to a better state will be weakened. So that, whether it be the irritation of heterogeneous matter, or whether it be the nisus of the blood towards a new diathesis, to which the origin of fever once referred, the indications are the same. Upon these fundamental principles, I institute the following system of therapeutics. 6. Whenever I have to deal with a patient whose blood is in itself of a weak character, as it is for the most part with children, or else deficient in animal spirits, as it is with men in the decline of life, and youths that long been invalids, I keep my fingers from the lancet. If I order venesection, the blood, weak enough even without being diminished, would be rendered incompetent to the work of despumation. Thence would arise the degeneration of its whole volume, whilst the death of the patient would probably come next. It runs just so when you interfere with fermentation of beer or any other liquor. It gets spoiled. Now, when nature has once taken in hand the expulsion of certain particles, which can keep themselves pure as long as they are equably mixed up with the remainder of the circulating fluids, but which, when separate, take on ill-conditioned forms of putridity, along with dispositions to taint with the worst sort of corruption the remainder of the humors, she cannot abide their contact. In stating this, I am aware that there are patients upon whom rash bloodlettings have been inflicted, that by the help of proper cordials have overlived the treatment, and that their blood has been restored to a condition competent to the necessary defecation. I know all this, and I can only say that prevention is better than cure. 7. Whenever, on the other hand, the state of the blood is of a different description, such as I find it amongst youths of an athletic habit and a sanguine temperament, venesection is my leading remedy. Except in certain cases which will be stated in the sequel, it cannot with safety be omitted. Neglect it, and you run the risk of frenzies, pleurisy, and such like inflammations, which originate in the preternatural ebullition of the blood. More than this, from the excess of the blood, the circulation one's impeded. You smother it. 8. As to the quantity, it is my practice to take away just so much blood as I consider will relieve the patient of the distress to which this violent commotion makes him liable. The subsequent estuation I regulate and restrict by venesection, hot cordials, and attention to the bowels. These I repeat or omit, I exhibit or withhold, encourage or check respectively, just as I perceive that the commotion increases or subsides. 9. After the bleeding, presuming such to have been necessary, I anxiously and carefully inquire whether the patient at the onset of the fever has been distressed by either vomiting or ineffectual efforts to vomit. If he have, I prescribe an emetic at once, unless, indeed, extreme youth or evident debility counter-indicate. Very necessary is an emetic where there has been this previous tendency to vomit, since, unless the offending matter be cleared away, it will serve as a sink for all sorts of mischief. These will embarrass the physician during the whole of his attendance and add greatly to the dangers of the patient. Of these, the most important, as well as the most usual, is diarrhea. It comes on during the defervescence of the fever, as often as emetics have been indicated and omitted. How should it be otherwise? As nature partially corrects the malignant humors in the stomach, she passes them on to the intestines, and these become corroded by the continuous flow of acrid humors which the belly serves as source to. Diarrhea must follow. Nevertheless, I have observed that in the inflammatory fever which goes by the common name of malignant, the omission of an emetic, even when nausea has preceded, does not, as in the present disease, necessarily ensure a diarrhea. Of this, however, more hereafter. 10. Now the danger of the diarrhea lies in this. The patient, weakened by the disease, grows weaker still. Moreover, and this is preeminently a cause of mischief, as the disease is declining, the blood should be drawing itself up. and it should be getting ready with its full strength to carry on the work of desquamation. Now, by this evacuation, it is disabled altogether, 1L. There is not even the shadow of a doubt, but that a peccant humor lodges on the stomach, unless expelled by a vomit, that it may be latent for a time, but that afterwards on that will give rise to this tragedy, for so I call it, of a diarrhea. You will find, if you inquire, in almost all cases when fever and diarrhea have gone together, that at the beginning of the disease the patient was inclined to vomit, and that the physician withheld an emetic. Again, you will discover that even when the tendency to vomit shall have long ago gone over, the diarrhea will generally stop if an emetic be administered, provided always that the strength of the patient will bear one. With respect to astringents, I have often noticed that when once diarrhea has set in, they have little control over it, whether taken inwardly or applied externally. 12. The emetic which I generally prescribe is as follows: antimonial infusion, 3 of oxymol of squills, compound syrup of scabious, and make into an emetic. I advise it to be taken in the afternoon, 2 hours after 11. In order that the retching may be less, I recommend that 6 or 8 pints of posset be kept in readiness. Emetics are dangerous unless diluted. As often as the patient either vomits or goes to stool, he takes a draught immediately. So doing, he escapes ineffectual tormina, and the efforts to vomit go on well. 13. I have often wondered, after eyeing curiously, as I frequently have done, the matters brought up by the emetic, and finding them neither remarkable for their quantity nor notably bad in their quality, that patients have been so much and so suddenly relieved, inasmuch as when the vomit has been over, the severer symptoms that both distress the patient and terrify his friends, the retching, the anxiety, the tossing, the heavy sighs, the blackness of the tongue, are mitigated and relieved, the remainder of disease being such as a stout heart may bear up against. 14. It must not be omitted that if the condition of the patient require the double remedy of venesection and vomits, the exhibition of the emetic should precede the opening of the vein. Otherwise the veins become distended with blood, and there is imminent danger lest the violent strainings to vomit break either a blow-odd vessel in the lungs or do an injury to the brain, since the blood pours both one and out with violence, and the patient may be taken off by a fit of apoplexy. I could relate more than one example of this. I prefer, however, to put better statements in their place, and to content myself with the hint that in matters of this sort our caution must be exceeding. 15. Now, if anyone asks, during what stage of the fever I would order the emetic to be exhibited, my answer is that whenever I have the choice, I order it at the very beginning. By so doing, we can ensure the patient against all those formidable symptoms which originate in the mass of impurities that lodged within the stomach and in the parts around it. Moreover, it is just possible that we may quash the disease at its onset, whereas it would otherwise wax mighty, last long, and jeopardize the patient, for it thrives upon the humors that we have spoken of, and these either transmit themselves in substance to the innermost recesses of the frame, and commingle with the volume of the blood, or else they stand still and grow from bad to worse, get tainted with a venomous depravity, and finally, from their respective foci, impress an infectious influence upon the continuous streams of blood that flow by them. Of this, to go no further, the cholera morbus gives an instance. Very frequently, either by the aid of laudanum or some astringent, the attempt is made to restrain the vomiting that accompanies. Such skill is mischievous. Stop the vomiting, and you replace it with a worse series of symptoms. All those acrid and corrupt humors which should have been left alone to be got rid of, and for which a full evacuation should have been procured, are thus driven inwards. Here they extend their pernicious influence to the blood and light up fevers of a malignant disposition, and with grave symptoms. It is then as much as we can do to cure them by means of an emetic. This, however, we must give, whether the patient at the time in question be inclined to vomit or not. 16. If, however, as is often the case, we are sent for too late, so that we cannot take advantage of the first stage of the fever for the administration of an emetic, I still consider that at any stage whatsoever, provided only that the malady has not too much prostrated the strength of the patient, and disabled him from bearing one, an emetic should be given. I have, for my own part, prescribed one on the 12th day of the disease, and that without hesitation and with benefit. By such an emetic, I have swept away the diarrhea, which was impeding the blood in its proper business of despumation. I have prescribed one even later than the 12th day, and have hesitated only where the prostration of strength has been excessive. 17. In the evening, when the vomiting one's over, I invariably endeavor to allay the tumult that it has raised amongst the humors, and to solicit sleep. To this end, latine the evening, or at bedem I order an anodyne draught. G. Red poppy waters, aqua mirabilis, 3 syrup of white poppy, syrup of red poppy, Aesius 18. If, however, through the free loss of blood that the patient has sustained during the course of the disease, from the frequent vomiting or purging induced by the action of the emetic, from the general character of the aporetic symptoms, from his individual weakness, or finally from the date of the fever now upon its decline, there be no longer any risk of exciting any excessive ebullition, I have no hesitation in substituting, for the anodyne above mentioned, a full dose of Diascordium, either by itself or conjoined with a cordial. There is no better medicine than this, if you only suit the dose to the symptoms rather than to the formularies. 19. Here, however, previous to concluding my observations upon emetics, I must remark that, in the present fever at least, antimonial emetics are not fit for children, or for youths under 14, even in the smallest doses. I wish with all my heart that, instead of them, something more safe and equally efficacious could be discovered, something that would thoroughly expel those vicious humors which, in the decline of fever, induce diarrhea. At least, I wish that, by means of some suitable medicine, we could so far alter and transform the corrosive character of this acrid matter as to stop it from being the cause of these loosenesses. It has often happened, to my great annoyance, that when called in to infants and children suffering under the fever in question, I have observed indications which have called for the exhibition of medicines which I have not ventured to prescribe. If I could have applied them, the patient would have been out of danger. If I had applied them, I should have trembled for the event. In adults, however, I have observed no such danger, as long as the emetic has been administered with the cautions above stated. 20. The business of vomiting being got through, I proceed to consider whether, notwithstanding the foregoing evacuations, the blood may not still be in such a state of situation as to require further limitations to its effervescence and further checks, or whether it may not so far have grown slack as to need a fillip. Finally, whether the fermentation be brought to a fit and proper pitch so that the patient can safely be left to himself. Upon each of these points I have something to say. 21. If the blood so extenuate that we may fairly suspect that the patient is liable to a frenzy or to any other troublesome symptom proceeding from excessive ebullition, I prescribe, the day after the emetic, an enema of the following formula, and recommend it to be repeated as occasion may require. Common decoction for clysters, syrup of violets, mess. It often happens that this ventilates and cools the blood, controlling its effervescence. At times, too, it happens that venesection must be repeated several times. Such is the case in v. airy sanguine temperaments, with men in the prime of life, and with those high livers who, by the free use of wine, have impressed upon their blood an inflammatory diathesis. Generally, however, there is no occasion for so heroic a remedy, for such truly is the repetition of venesections. Besides this, with the few above-named exceptions, we can sufficiently control the effervescence by the administration of enemotic. Wherefore, if the blood still continue to boil and effervesce more than it ought to do, I order the injection of an enema, either every day or every other day as the case requires. And this I continue to the 10th day of the disease, there or thereabouts. 22, however, if a vast deal of blood have been lost, or if the patient be advanced in years, I order no enemata, even though the blood may go on boiling. In such cases there is no fear that by omitting clysters we shall allow the ebullition to proceed to dangerous lengths. On the contrary, nothing is more certain that the use of them relaxes the strength of fullness, and if I may use an equivocal expression, the zone of the blood, so much so, that with old men, with whom enemata never succeeds so well as with the young, the work of nature is disturbed and interrupted. Now, if a vein has been opened and not much blood been taken, clysters may be ordered, and that up to the 10th day, more or less. Sometimes they may be continued to the 12th, a practice which holds good in those cases where we are afraid of bloodletting. There are those who, after the autumnal intermittence, whether tertian or quartan, are seized with continued fever, and this because at the fag end of the disease that went before, they were not purged as they should have been. Now, if you bleed these, there is the danger of the residue and sediment, the deposit, as it were, of the previous fermentation being again taken up into the volume of the blood, and incendering fresh commotions. Instead, therefore, of bloodletting, I use in cases like these enemata, and I keep them on to the 12th day whenever the patient be young and fermentation run high. 23. On the other hand, whether you have or have not had recourse to venesection, provided that the effervescence of the blood be below par, and that it require a stimulus to enable it to second the efforts of nature, you must abstain from clysters. You must abstain from them during even the first 10 days, and a fortiori you must abstain from them afterwards. For why should we endeavor to control any further and to repress the fermentation? It already has grown faint and is exhausted. After the 12th day, and during the decline of the disease, to use clysters is irrational and absurd. It is just like making a huge oversized vent for beer whilst it is fermenting. Such is a clog upon nature, and it prevents her tea from acting with her full energies, and with her united force against the morbific matter. 24. As soon as from the effect, O.F. well-timed and suitable evacuations, the patient is out of harm's way, and as soon as he has nothing more to fear from the symptoms that arise out of excessive ebullition, in other words, when the disease one's on its decline, I consider him out of danger just in proportion as I can keep his bowels in proper order. For under such conditions, the fever most mildly and benignly proceeds toward its concoction. Wherefore, if the preceding evacuations have engendered any laxity of blood, or if they seem likely to do so, or if the patient get quit of the fever before its time, or finally, if the fever have run its full length, I not only discard enemata, but I have recourse to the help of cordials, and I gird up my loins for dealing with the looseness of the bowels. 25. In regard to cordials, I am cautious in their exhibition, since I have found out by experience that no little mischief comes from exhibiting them too soon, e.g., before the opening of a vein, since in such a case the crude matter may fall upon the brain, the pleura, or elsewhere. Hence I never administer them when little or no blood has been previously taken, when, combined with this, no notable evacuation has taken place, and lastly, when the patient has not passed the prime of life. For I see no reason why such blood as is already richer than it ought to be should be further and perniciously overfed. It has all the fullness and the fire which it requires, and it wants nothing new to light it up as long as its natural heat is unimpaired by the effect of violent evacuations. Patients of this sort have cordials at their own doors, and whatever they introduce from without is either superfluous or prejudicial. For this reason I allow nothing of the sort, or if I do, I admit it under the mildest forms. 26. Meanwhile, if the patient have grown weak, and if he be pulled down by the profuseness of the evacuations, or if he be advanced in years, I make a point of prescribing cordials even at the commencement of the malady, and on the 12th day. When the process of elimination is setting in, indulge him liberally in the warmer drinks. I do so even earlier, guarding against the sudden retrocession of the febrile matter towards the principal parts. At this stage, the more I heat, the more I accelerate concoction. 27. I cannot bring my brain to comprehend the meaning of those physicians that are continually talking about the administration of remedies that promote the concoction of the febrile matter, points which they insist upon when called in at the beginning of the disease. At the same time, they have no hesitation in recommending medicines that are intended to control the fever. Why, the fever itself is nature's instrument. By this she separates the pure parts from the tainted ones. At the beginning, or even at the height of diseases, she does her work imperceptibly. During, however, their declines, she shows us at once clearly and palpably what she is about. This we may see by looking at the urine. The concoction of the matter of fever simply means the separation of the sound from the unsound. To accelerate this, we are not to meddle with the temperance, and I know not what. But we are to let the effervescence go on as long as the condition of the patient can bear with it. We are to watch for its crisis and declension, and when we discover that separation is taking place, we are to back it up with warm remedies, and to bring it to a sure and speedy termination. This is the true way of promoting febrile concoction. Your evacuants and refrigerants are but hindrances. They procrastinate recoveries, and when health is coming of its own accord, they frighten it away. This I have seen often. If the fermentation proceed properly, the despumation will be completed by the 14th day, but if you attempt to control it by the exhibition of refrigerants, you must not wonder if it go on to the 20th. In worn-out constitutions, where the treatment has been unskillful, it is further protracted. 28. It is worthy of observation that occasionally the patient, at the decline of the disease, and after the ill-timed administration of clysters and other cathartics, may appear to have been slightly benefited. Nay, at times there is a perfect cessation of the fever. Wait, however, for a day or two. It will then be seen of that the original fever has taken strength, but that a fresh one is lit up. Chills and shivers will set in suddenly. Heats will follow. The fever itself, unless perchance it proves to be an intermittent, will run through the stages of the former one. When such is the case, treat the patient as if he had not been ill before, go over the ground a second time. The despumation that this ebullition is driving at will not be completed within its due complement of days, viz. 14. Much as it may be distressing to the patient, who is sufficiently weakened by what has gone before, to wait so long for his recovery. 29. The cordials which I am in the habit of using are those that I will give a short notice of by and by. I prescribe the gentlest at the commencement of a disease, that is, when the ferment is most active. I proceed gradually to the stronger ones according to the progress of the malady and the character of the ebullition, always remembering that when the blood has been drawn or the patient is old, I can increase their strength. Not so when the subject is young and the lancet has never been employed. 90. The cordials I call moderate are made out of the distilled waters, e.g., borage, lemon, strawberry, treacle, the aqua scorda camp, and C, combined with the syrup of balm fernelius, the syrup of cloves, the syrup of lemon juice, and C. The cordials I call strong are made from Gascoigne's powder, bezoar, confection of hyacinth, Venice treacle, and the like. The following formula are in frequent use: citron water, Aquascordi comp, black cherry water, IIGA, cinnamon water with barley, toji, peppered pearls, 3-EGA, loaf sugar, QSE. Mix and take IV spoonfuls several times a day, especially during the faintnesses. Air water of the whole citron, strawberry water, AAZ, Saxony water 3, treacle water, syrup of balm fernelius, syrup of cloves, syrup of lemon juice, ASSS. Mix and make into a julep. K. Gascoigne's power, bezoar of the east, bezoar of the west, Contrerva, Ianinage, 1 gold leaf, mix and make into a very fine powder, of which take 12 grains, as often as is necessary, out of syrup of lemon juice, syrup of cloves, AI treacle. Drink after in a few spoonfuls of the above-mentioned julep, EK treacle water, sieve, lemon seeds, 5 crush, and make into an emulsion. Strain and add sufficient pearled sugar to flavor it, 2 spoonfuls a day. I consider it superfluous to go through a longer list of formulae. They either are or can be made innumerable, and they should be varied during the course of the illness according to its different stages and its varied symptoms. But if the fermentation be neither too active nor too languid, I leave it to itself, and I use no remedies unless prevailed upon against my will by the importunity of either the sick man or the friends about him, to order something that may please the patient without interfering with the scope and method of my treatment. 92. And here I may mention that several times when I have been called into persons in indifferent circumstances, whose purses would ill bear to be drawn upon for a long charge of physic, I have done nothing after the bleeding, and the emetic, in such cases as they were required, beyond enjoining them to keep their beds closely during the whole of the disease. and to drink oatmeal gruel, barley broth, or something of that sort. Lo, quench their thirst, they were allowed a little small beer with the chill off. They were to inject every other day an enema of milk and sugar. They were to continue this until the 10th or 11th day, and towards the termination of the fever, when the separation began to set in, they were permitted to take some strong drink, in the way of a cordial, in order to forward it. In this manner, without any further complication of practice, beyond the mere addition of a purge towards the conclusion of the complaint, I sent them out of hand safe and sound. 33. To return, however, to the business. If the preceding regimen has been accurately attended to, I generally discover about the 15th day that the time has come when a purgative draught may be administered with advantage. I judge of this both from the signs in the urine of a laudable separation and from the palpable remission of the other symptoms. This purge draws off the miscellaneous sediment of the preceding fermentation, and the chances are that they return to the blood and produce a relapse, or else by its prolonged lodgment in the parts that it belongs to, becomes a fruitful source of obstinate mischief in the frame, since, the separation being over, the impure humors flow back from the arteries to the veins, creating obstacles and ferments. 94. But here I must remark that the administration of purgatives is less essential after the spring fevers than after the autumnal ones. The sediment that is left behind by the former yields to that of the latter both in quantity and quality. It is less earthy and malignant. The same is the case in smallpox and many other of the diseases that make their incursions during the spring. In all these, the omission of purgatives ones, as far as my observation has extended itself, accompanied with less danger than it is in the cases above mentioned. A man would not be far from wrong who stated that upon this single cause, viz., the omission of purgatives after autumnal diseases, a greater heap of disease was dependent than upon any other cause whatsoever. 35. If the patient be exceedingly weak, or if the depuration be incomplete, and I am afraid of purging on the 15th day, I put it off to the 17th. I then prescribe either the following draught or something like it, adapted to the strength of the subject: tamarinds, thrush, senna leaves, fiver, rhubarb, vivace. Boil with a sufficient quantity of water, strength of 3 ounces. Add of manna and the solutive syrup of roses, for a to g. Mix and make a draught, to be taken in the morning. 36. When the purging is over, the patient, who up to the present has been kept to his bed by my order, is told to get up and to return by degrees to his usual manner of living. The diet that he has hitherto been recommended is of the kind which I have just alluded to: barley broth, oatmeal gruel, panados, made with the yolk of an egg, with bread, sugar, and water, then chicken broth and small beer well hopped. Herewith, at the times when the fever rages highest, we may mix up a little orange juice, fresh squeezed, and held over the fire just long enough to take off its sharpness. Such and such like tallow. However, oatmeal gruel is worth all of them put together. To deny small beer to be taken now and then, and in small quantities, is an unnecessary severity, and one which frequently does harm. 97. It happens sometimes, chiefly with old men, that when the patient has got better and the body has been purged or over-purged, he still continues very weak, and that he often throws up, either by coughing or hawking, a vast quantity of viscid and glutinous phlegm. This symptom not only frightens the patient, but also imposes on the physician. Unless he be very wary, he will be induced to imagine that the disease has paved the way for a consumption. Now I have noticed that there is not this amount of danger. In such a case, I order the patient to drink some old Malaga wine, some Falernian or some Muscatel, with a toast in it. This restores the crassus of the blood, which the violence of the previous ferment had impaired, and which is incompetent to the assimilation of the juices of the ingesta. Frequent experience tells me that such treatment dispels these symptoms within a few days. 388. By the method that I have laid down, we may ensure the patient from a variety of symptoms and affections, which are usually attributed to the so-called malignity of his complaint, since nothing is more usual than for ill-taught practitioners to shift the blame from their own misdoings to malignity. Thus, when they give medicines too cooling and use enemata at the wrong time, and by so doing weaken the crassus of the blood. One here follow, in the editions of 1566 and 1568, the subjoined remarks upon the use of blisters, e.g. In regard to blisters, which are so much in use, I neither see my way as to how they draw off the ichorous fluids from the muscular parts wherein they lodge, or how they can in any wise free the blood from the febrile matter that disturbs it, over and above which they irritate the patient by the sore which they produce upon the skin, and add to the lowering effects of the disease. Although I have often used them, and have found that my patients have done well, I cannot refer any good to their action. I believe that they have as much to do with the recovery of those to whom they are applied, as the featherbed itself. Luck has ennobled many a worthless medicine, and when nature is overdone by its work of depuration, and when the natural consequences of these artificial impediments occur, and when the patient faints, and when worse symptoms follow, it is the malignity, forsooth, that is in fault. Perhaps, however, the disease becomes protracted, and so escapes so harsh an appellation, whilst nevertheless there is something that obstructs the cure of it. This must then be scorbutus. Now, in sober truth, the symptoms during the activity of disease are no more the effects of malignity than those of its decline are of scorbutus. Both come of bad treatment, as I have abundantly observed. Not that either I or anyone else, who has ever even skimmed the history of medicine, need be told that there are such things as fevers, truly malignant in their quality, as well as those that originate in a bad temperament, or from putrid heat. Proofs of this cannot be concealed where there is sickness. Neither do I deny that occasionally scorbutus, as well as other diseases, may complicate fever. I only say that these affections are often unjustly blamed. 99. If the fermentation of the blood has gone on properly, a thorough despumation of the morbific matter will have taken place within the above-mentioned period. But if clysters or refrigerants have been used too late, the disease will run on much longer, especially with old men who have been badly treated. I have been sent for to these after they had been laboring of the fever for as much as 40 days. And I have tried everything that I could think of in order to promote the despumation of the blood. It has, however, partly from old age, partly from use of enemata and refrigerants, been so attenuated that neither cordials nor corroborants would help me. The fever either continued obstinate and undiminished, or else there seemed to be an aporexia. The strength of the patient was prostrated, and he became all but dead. 40. Having had recourse to other remedies without success, L was compelled to turn my thoughts towards new quarters, and to apply to the patients the lively and vigorous warmth of young people. Let no one wonder at the strangeness of this method, when he hears that so much has the sick man been restored by it, and so much has debilitated nature been renovated, that it has unloaded itself of the remnants of the matter that it secretes and eliminates. Since it is very credible that a notable supply of fresh effluvia from a sound and athletic body may be transfused into a sick and exhausted one, I've never found that the repeated application of warm flannels has ever had the effect of the plan I have described. In this, the warmth is of a kind congenial to the human frame, and it is at the same time bland, humid, equal, and perfect. Now, this principle of transfusing into the body of the patient effluvia and exhalations, which perhaps may be of a balsamic nature, although at first it may seem strange, has been applied from the time that I first adopted it, by others as well as myself, and that with good results, and I am by no means ashamed of it, even although some few from amongst the arrogant, impertinent, and supercilious despisers of everything common may sneer at me by reason of it. I put the well-doing of my neighbor far above the vain opinions of the like of such men as these. 41. The method that I have thus far laid down will, if rigidly followed and properly adhered to, relieve the patient, if not from all, at least from the most distressing of the symptoms, which are the concomitants of the sequels of the fever, which trouble the physician with doubt, and which often, during the progress of the disease, bring him to despair, which, worse than this, often kill the patient outright, and that when his disease seems anything rather than deadly. Now, since either from the fault of the sick man who sends for a doctor at the wrong time, or from want of skill and caution on the part of the doctor that has been sent for, accidents of the kind in question are often observed to arise. I have no hesitation in treating briefly of the peculiar treatment of the same. I shall confine myself, however, to those symptoms which require, when they occur, a separate and peculiar of treatment, but which could generally have been guarded against by attention to the rules and methods laid down. 42. I begin with the cases where, either from having taken heating remedies too soon and too indiscreetly, or from the natural tendencies of a high constitution, the patient falls into a brain fever, or into what is next door to it. He gets no sleep. He utters frequent exclamations. He uses incoherent language. He looks and talks wildly. He gulps down his medicines and food with avidity, and by snatches. Finally, he has a suppression of urine. In these cases, I bleed more freely than I would otherwise, and I am readier with my clysters and refrigerants. In springtime, I am particularly bold at that time. Independent of the above symptoms, the young and sanguine safely bear strong remedy. 43. By this treatment, I endeavor to sustain the patient until the disease takes a certain duration, when it becomes an easy matter to remove at once both the malady and the symptoms. This is done by the exhibition of a narcotic in a full dose. However, true it may be that during the height of the fever narcotic medicines are of no avail, and that they miss their mark. It is no less true that, during its decline, their effects are most marked. They do no good before for two reasons. Firstly, they are insufficient, even when administered in the largest doses, to stop the fermentation when it has got its head, and is in its full career. Secondly, and this is the more important circumstance, they stop the desired depuration, the effect of their exhibition being to do violence to the processes by which the morbid matter is separated. At the height of a fever, it is mixed equally with the whole volume of the blood, and has not as yet shown any tendency towards isolation. Whether this theory be the right one, or whether something more abstruse must be substituted for it, I leave to the decision of those who have time, taste, and temper for the necessary speculations. 44, meanwhile, after an honest and fair induction from many observations, I pronounce this as an undoubted truth, and as a thing most certain, viz., that during the increase and crisis of the fever, neither laudanum nor any other narcotic alleviates the symptoms that we have spoken of. On the contrary, it often does harm, but that during its decline, even moderate doses are beneficial. Once in my life, J prescribed a narcotic as early as the 12th day, and good came of the prescription. Never, however, will I give one earlier without mischief. Defer it till the 14th day, and proportionate benefits will result, since, by that time, the separation will be all the forwarder. This delay is not immediately fatal, however much the formidable nature of the symptoms may terrify the looker-on. I frequently noticed that they both could and would bear a respite until narcotics could be had recourse to. Herein, however, we must be especially careful against heightening the fermentation that has set in. This we may do by administering heating, medicines, and cordials. If so, the patient will die outright. The narcotics which I am in the habit of using are either the London laudanum to the amount of 1.5 grains, or the following: Chi